Hi software, welcome back. You guys have now seen what for loops look like, and we're going to practice making more for loops and making them control even more specific things about our code than just position of shapes, which is where they really start to get fun. So there is starter code for today. Please make sure you open that up from the weekly work. Once you're there, go to File, Duplicate so that you have your own copy. As always, once you've duplicated, you also need to hit save and hit save consistently to make sure that you have your most recent copy. We are going to get started coding along, and remember, you should add any notes that you can think of as code comments because that will only help you when we get into more difficult and more open-ended projects. Now, we're going to start out by trying to make a for loop that is not just going to make a row of shapes, but that is also going to make them have a color gradient that is controlled by that same variable that's controlling our position. So remember that to do this, I'm going to use a for loop, and the contents of my for loop are always declaring, setting a limit or a range, and then iterating a variable, or incrementing a variable. I'm sorry, those are our three pieces that always need to be there. Also, please remember that this loop should end one day. There should be a world where I hit this limit in the middle and it does not keep running anymore based on the incrementation. If that doesn't happen, there's a strong chance that you will create something called an infinite loop. If you create an infinite loop, your browser is definitely going to crash. Everything's going to freeze. You're going to need to close out and reopen. It's going to be really frustrating for you. But it will probably happen to all of us at least once. It even happens to me pretty regularly. What I would advise to give you the best possible chance to get this right is to make sure that you do not have auto refresh turned on. That's really going to mess you up. Keep it turned off to make sure that it doesn't start running before your loop is done. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to drop down on line 10 and I'm going to make just a very basic for loop. So I'm going to put in for. I'm going to put in some parentheses, I'm going to put in my curly braces that decide where my loop begins and ends, and then I'm going to go back to these parentheses and I'm going to try and fill in all the pieces of my for loop. Now please remember I type super fast, so pause, slow down, rewatch whenever you need to, and just make sure that you stick with me here. So inside my for loop, the first thing I need to do is give it a variable. Now we said that I is like the classic for loop variable, but this could be anything. I could call this variable skunk if I wanted to, and I could have skunk start at 10. That's totally fine. After I've declared my variable, I put in a semicolon. It is one of the only times I need a semicolon, and then I need a limit for how far skunk can run. So I think I would like my row of shapes to go to the edge of my page, so I'm going to say that skunk needs to be less than or equal to 400, and every time this loop runs, I'm going to increase skunk by plus 30. Let's try that. Now, this gets pretty lengthy, especially in the incrementation portion, so there is one little, nice thing I want to show you. Rather than writing skunk equals skunk plus 30 every single time, I can get rid of that and write skunk plus equals 30, which I can't remember if we've looked at or not. This is a simpler way of saying take whatever skunk was before, add 30 to it, and that is now what skunk equals. So skunk plus equal 30 means that every time this runs, the skunk variable is going to go up by 30. Now, to use this to make a row of shapes is pretty straightforward. I'm going to use rectangles this time. You guys have seen this before. If I want it to be a row left to right, I'm going to use skunk in the X position. I'm going to make the Y position 75. Rectangles need both a width and a height. I'm going to make little squares that are both 30 and 30, and then I'm going to hit play, and I'm going to see I should have this nice long row of rectangles that goes edge to edge. Now, as we saw last time, I can keep messing with this. If I don't like this edge thing there, I could make skunk start at 0. Then I have wall-to-wall rectangles. If I don't like that, maybe I have skunk start at 50, and maybe I say that it has to be greater than or equal to 350. So now I get this little row in between. Maybe it just needs to be less than 350. Okay, now I have a little row. I'm happy with this row. I'm going to leave this as it is. You could also mess with this last number. I'm going to keep adjusting my canvas size so you can see. If I didn't add 30, if I were to add, say, 40, it's going to adjust how my rectangles are spaced out. You're welcome to play with that too. Once you have something you like, we're going to try and use skunk in a different place. We said we want a color gradient, so that means that on my rectangle, I'm going to need a fill. And I'm going to start with my normal boring fill of magenta, 250s, 255, 0, 255. But what if instead of numbers, hard-coded numbers that don't change, what if one of these numbers is replaced with my variable? So I'm going to take out this last value, which in RGB is the blue value, and instead of 255, I'm going to write in skunk. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And we should now see that we have this very subtle gradation going from red into pink and all the way to magenta. That is because skunk is just a number, so anywhere in my code where I see a number being used, I can plug in that skunk variable. And the really cool thing is if I don't like the way this looks, or this looks kind of weird to me, or I just want to mess with it, I can even do some math on this skunk variable to make it look a little different. So I know, for example, colors go up to 255, but the skunk variable is going up to 350. What if I divided every value of skunk by 2? Now I get an even more subtle range. I could even divide it by like 1.25 so that I get like a different range. I can just like play with the numbers that are there to try and get it to look how I want. I could see what happens if I add. Now it's like a much shorter range. I could see what happens if I subtract every time. Now my range is a little longer. I don't think it's going to do anything good for me right now, but I could even try multiplying. I'm going to bring back the multiply by 1.25 because I thought that was like the nicest range that I got. But I now have a fill that is being controlled by the skunk variable. If I wanted to get like really crazy, I could even throw more variables in there where skunk controls part, but maybe where my mouse is on the x-axis controls another. So now I have a gradient that changes between blues and between reds and magentas. So what you guys are going to try and do is make more rows of shapes where your iterating variable is not only controlling where things are positioned, but it also is controlling something about that shape. And if you would like to play with throwing in mouse X or mouse Y just to keep things interesting, you are more than welcome to do that as well. So you have 3 more challenges underneath here. Do your very best to make me some interesting rows of shapes. What type of shape you use is completely up to you. Good luck, guys!